listener production.
He's one of music's most powerful men, but even Sean Diddy Combs is not above the law. The music mogul and rapper was due to be sentenced in the US on Friday, or yesterday, Australian time, after being convicted of 2 prostitution offences, but was cleared of more serious sex trafficking charges back in July. Diddy reportedly sent a last-minute mercy plea to the judge beforehand, claiming he was sincerely sorry for his behaviour and has been humbled while in prison, and vowed to never commit a crime again. To bring you back up to speed on the case, in today's bonus episode of The Briefing, Natarsha Belling is joined by music industry expert, Associate Professor Catherine Strong from RMIT University, after Sean Diddy Combs received his verdict.
Catherine, thanks so much for joining us. Can you explain to us who Sean Diddy Combs is?
He is best described, I think people usually use the term hip-hop mogul when they speak about Diddy. And what they mean by that is that he's somebody who has built up enormous wealth and power over the last 30 to 40 years, mainly through being associated with hip-hop. He had a hip-hop career of his own, so he's very well known for the song I'll Be Missing You, which he wrote about Notorious B.I.G., who he managed and who was shot as part of a series of shootings and murders that happened in the 80s between the East Coast and the West Coast hip-hop crews, so most famously represented by Tupac and then by Biggie. And that song was a very big hit, but he had already been becoming very well known as a manager, as somebody who put together other people's careers for them. And that is sort of more of the role that he's had. He then moved into things like clothing. He had a series of restaurants that I think have all closed down now, but he has had a number of different business ventures, and that is how he's built up a lot of wealth. But his fame has come through his association with hip hop, and then increasingly his notoriety because of the parties and the extravagance of his lifestyle and the violence that he has inflicted upon many people over the years.
Okay, Catherine, let's get to this court case. All the world's attention has been on this court case involving Diddy Combs. Also, you mentioned he did move in very, very powerful circles with a lot of famous people, both in Hollywood and the music world. We know that the verdict was handed down today, that he was found not guilty, which is really important to note here, of the biggest charge he was facing, which is racketeering conspiracy. He was also found not guilty of the sex trafficking of his former partner, Cassandra Ventura, or the sex trafficking of another woman who's just been known as Jane to hide her identity. But he has been found guilty on a number of other charges. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, so the racketeering charge was the prosecutor's way of trying to get as many different possible things that he'd done included in what he was being charged with as possible. Because once you accuse someone of racketeering, which is basically having a crime syndicate, having a crime business, like being the head of a big organisation that's doing a lot of criminal things and you being the person who's in charge of it, right? Once you have that charge in the mix, it means that a whole bunch of statute of limitations on various things fall away. So I think it was an attempt at being able to get as many things on the table in terms of his behaviour as possible. It was a really big thing to try and do. And I guess it's not entirely surprising that they have failed on that, because it does take, I guess, a lot to get people to buy into the idea that all of the things that he's done have been part of like a planned and well thought out and well organised organisation essentially that he's been running. And you know, the jury have not been convinced of that, as it turns out. Look, I think it's really important to note that in the unfolding of this trial, even though he has not been found guilty of the sex trafficking, but he has been found guilty of the prostitution charges, which means that he has brought these 2 women somewhere in order for them to be prostituted out, right? In the midst of all of that, he has admitted to a bunch of other awful behaviours, right? His lawyers have said openly in court, this man has been violent towards his partners. He is a domestic abuser. They said something along the lines of, we own the fact that he has been violent towards his domestic partners. The judge and a number of other people have repeatedly pulled out evidence and have accepted evidence, and he hasn't pulled back on this either, pushed back particularly, that he is a violent person, that he has done violent things to people, not just his partners. So I think one of the things that's really interesting to take away from this is that at the moment we're seeing a lot of celebration on the part of his supporters, and a lot of headlines that have been written are sort of like, P. Diddy gets off, P. Diddy found guilty, and then in brackets sort of at the end of it, but, got found guilty on these other little things. But the big things he didn't get found guilty of. But just all of this stuff in the midst of this, which is a super, super powerful man, being able to stand up in court and say, I have abused my partners. I'm just going to stand up and say that to everybody. And to have people coming away from that still to have anybody still supporting him under those circumstances, and to have people coming away saying, what a win, good on him. It just feels like, as is often the case when it comes to cases around gender-based violence, it feels often like the main point is just sort of getting lost, which is that this is a person who does terrible things to other people and has stood up in court and admitted that, but just wasn't charged with those things. So it didn't matter in this case. So he's gotten off. He may be facing some jail time still. He has been in jail for the last 9 months, and apparently in a very awful prison as well. The reason he was kept in prison that whole time is because the judge repeatedly said, in the face of numerous requests by his lawyers, the judge came back over and over to the fact that this is a person known to be violent, and that he had already done things in jail that were essentially him trying to threaten the people who were going to be speaking up against him, even when he was in jail. And when people are as powerful and as rich as he is, they have the capacity to do that sort of thing. So I think it's incredible that there were any women who were prepared to actually stand up, especially Cassie Ventura. I think she is an incredible person, that she was so brave that she stood up and put her name to the allegations that she was making, because she would have known better than anybody what a dangerous person it was that she was coming up against. She is so brave. The other woman, Jane, incredibly brave. And I hope that this outcome is enough for them to feel as though they can move on with their lives and feel as though there will be some sort of closure for them as well.
Catherine, during this case, though, talking specifically about Cassie, there had always been pretty damning allegations about his alleged violence. I'm talking about Diddy. Until that horrific video surfaced of what Diddy did to Cassie in the lobby of a hotel, there were serious doubts over whether he was violent. My point being, if that video didn't surface, considering how powerful and the influential friends that Diddy has, would have Cassie ever been believed?
I think there's a very good chance that she may not have been. And I think that there are still a lot of people who will be casting doubt upon her version of events. There are a number of other people who are pursuing civil cases against him. And one of the narratives that you see all the time around this sort of thing is these people are just gold diggers. They are just out there trying to make a buck. They're just out there because they want revenge on these people for some reason. There are so many ways in which the stories that women tell about these sorts of men are cast in a negative light, or there are ways in which their version of events has doubt cast upon it, and they're very compelling. Like we as a society have really brought into, in a lot of ways, the idea that women will lie about these things, even though the evidence is that women very, very rarely lie about this stuff. And it's far, far more common for people to abuse women and get away scot-free, right? You can see even in this case, this person still has so many supporters and so many people who are prepared to stand by his side. It's very hard for women to get justice when they are abused.
Catherine, I'll ask you, if there was the clear evidence about him physically abusing Cassie and possibly other people, why didn't the prosecutors go for a domestic violence charge instead of these more serious charges?
maybe they felt confident enough in those bigger charges and thought that because that big charge, the racketeering charge, comes with I believe it is a mandatory life sentence. So they obviously decided that the risk that they were taking there was worth the potential payoff, in that they thought that this is someone who deserves to be behind bars for the rest of their life. And it didn't pay off. Beyond that, I'm not entirely sure what they were thinking when they decided to go down the route that they went.
He has been found guilty of the 2 counts, as you mentioned before, of transportation to engage in prostitution. He is set to be sentenced, Diddy, I'm talking about, around the 3rd of October. There is a lot of speculation. We don't, of course, know what the sentence may be, but it could be around 2 to 4 years. What type of message do you think that sends? Because he has already been in jail for a number of months. Do you think that's a harsh enough penalty, or what kind of message do you think that sends?
It isn't a very long sentence. In terms of all of the things that we sort of know that he's been up to, it doesn't feel like a long sentence. In terms of what he was actually charged with and found guilty of, I mean, I guess it seems like that's the sort of thing that you might expect. I mean, what this sort of thing says about us as a society and the way that we regard certain types of crimes and other types of crimes, I think is probably the bigger question. It is very unusual for men who are this powerful and this rich and this embedded in places like the entertainment industry to suffer actually any consequences, right? I think it's fairly well known at this point that there are a lot of predators that exist within those sorts of spaces who have become so powerful that they are essentially untouchable. And it has been very unusual since the Me Too movement to see some of these people being taken down and having to suffer any consequences for what they've done. But there are a lot more still out there. And people know that it costs you a lot personally if you speak up against these people. And I think the fact that we have a society where these power structures are allowed to exist in such a way that people can be so powerful that the question of consent becomes almost fictitious. If somebody is incredibly powerful and incredibly rich, if they ask you to do something, you know, whether it's something sexual or whether it's just something in terms of go and get me a cup of coffee or whatever it is they ask you, it becomes very, very, very difficult for people to say no to people like that, no matter what they're after. And I think that there is like a much, much, much bigger question that we need to be thinking about and trying to address, which is about how you break down these sorts of power structures that enable people to be in those sorts of positions. Because it is very rare that people, once they get that big and powerful, don't end up doing some sort of damage to the people around them. It's that sort of power is so hard for people to resist the lure of and to not be corrupted by. And I think that's the really big question that we've got here.
Catherine, we appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this bonus episode of The Briefing. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning with the headlines and a deep dive from the rest of the team. Until then, you can subscribe or follow wherever you're listening from, and you can find us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Helen Smith. Catch you next time.